Can I ask you about Alexandria?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was talking to a historian that says he doesn't think that the Library of Alexandria, which held so much of the ancient
Here we
world,
go. Here we go.
so
Luke.
much of the
Get
ancient
cooking,
world knowledge,
Luke.
he was saying that perhaps it never burned down and that it actually just eroded from the elements, intellectual decay, invasion.
He's saying that it never burned down. Like he really said that.
That there's a part of it that burned down, but perhaps the burning was more of a metaphorical burning.
Yeah. Well, see, that's kind of the thing is you could talk to an Egyptologist who specializes in the 18th dynasty, like as a lot of them do. It's like the golden age of ancient Egypt, where you have all your iconic pharaohs that you know the names of, other than Ramses. He's 19th dynasty, but and he may be like speaking off the cuff about Alexandria and just kind of posing an idea that's popular among scholars. But it's surprising that any scholars say that it didn't burn down because it's in the primary sources that it burned down like 3 or 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
So
who burned it down?
Well, it starts with, so we're getting into some Roman stuff here. And when it comes to the Mediterranean world, Egypt and Greece is my thing. When you get into the Roman world, it's a whole other realm. But I believe that it first starts with Julius Caesar is chasing his rival Pompey across the Mediterranean Pompey is fleeing from Rome to Alexandria. And Pompey, in Rome, basically the armies were made up by like really rich guys who would take up like a portion of the Roman Empire, right? So you have like these unofficial mini emperors or like nomarchs that sort of run shit. Mm-hmm. And so these two rivals, as they do, chasing each other, they're at war with each other. Julius Caesar's chasing Pompey down into the Mediterranean. And I believe that when Pompey is trying to flee the city of Alexandria, his military boats were brought up to the port that was connected to the library. And so Caesar ordered for the docks to be burned, to burn the boats so that Pompey's guys couldn't flee. So essentially when you landed in Alexandria, your boat would be boarded by city officials, Ptolemaic soldiers, or sometimes at certain points they were Roman soldiers because this was like the beginning of the fall of ancient Egypt. But eventually Ptolemaic rule, which is the Greek dynasty that's ruling over Egypt, after Alexander conquers, Alexander dies, his best friend Ptolemy becomes pharaoh of Egypt, and then his line all the way down to Cleopatra for the next 300 years rules over Egypt from the city of Alexandria. So the Ptolemaic power starts dwindling, so they reach out to Rome and start hiring essentially like Roman military backing, and that's kind of the foot into the door for the Romans to start conquering Egypt from the inside. That's the beginning of the end for Egypt. But essentially, your boat would be boarded by city officials, and they would essentially scour your boat, or just ask you, be like, okay, what writing do you have with you? What documents did you bring? They'd look over your documents. If it was something valuable that they didn't have, they would bring that into the library. They would copy it down. They would give you the copy, and then they would keep the original. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and
so you have the original source material of everybody that passes through that city.
And so this is something that I'd love to see Wes Huff talk about this, but there's something that's here that's called, I've heard it informally referred to as the Library Wars. But you had like the Library of Alexandria, the Library of Babylon, the Library of Pergamum, I believe, up on the Turkish coast. I believe that's where that city is. And so you had all these cities essentially warring against each other, trying to get original source material and the oldest documents. And so in the city of Alexandria, you had so much knowledge of the ancient world all in one place. I mean, when I was chatting with when I was on Joe's show, we were going through something that was written by, I believe it was written by one of the Ptolemies. It was a 2nd century BC document that was being referenced by like a 1st century AD document. But we found out on the show, I like called out the date. I was like, look at that. So we looked into it. And essentially on the show, even though this is probably known by some scholars, but we found another document that was being referenced that doesn't exist anymore, that was definitely destroyed or existed in Alexandria.
So proof of destruction.
Yeah. So, and there's all kinds of stories like that. Like the greatest biography that was written about Alexander the Great, from his most trusted advisor, Ptolemy himself, who becomes the first Ptolemaic pharaoh of Egypt. He wrote this whole biography of his own life and an account of Alexander's life, and that did not survive. It did not survive the period of Alexandria, but it's referenced by other authors later on. So we know that it used to exist, and there's all kinds of.
Why this obsession with Alexandria? Why was Alexander obsessive? Why did he want to, bring his dynasty, and why was it so important to him that this existed there?
Yeah.
What is special about this place?
Well, so for Alexander, I don't actually know if Alexandria itself in Egypt was as important to him as it would be to later people, because there's a joke that if you study classics, which is the Greco-Roman Egyptian world, there's a joke where they'll say name 10 classical cities, and you can say Alexandria because there's 10 Alexandrias.
So anywhere he goes,
and anywhere he goes, he builds a lot of Alexandrias. But the one that stuck was Egypt, and so Alexander, there's this great story of when he's conquering the Persian realm. Okay, so he's 23 years old or 25 years old. He leaves Macedonia right here. Persia's beating up on the Greeks for, let me see, he's I guess around like 325 BC or 323 BC. He sets out. It's somewhere around there, or maybe it's earlier than that. 331 is when he arrives in Egypt. It's something like that. But anyway, so this crazy 23-year-old, 25-year-old kid takes on the Persian Empire, marches through in these 3 very important battles, pushes the Persians back. Eventually, he wants to march to Babylon, but he shouldn't do that until he turns west and goes and captures Egypt, because Egypt is known as the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, because all the grain and the food to feed, at many points, to feed most of the Eastern Mediterranean came out of Egypt.
Right out of Egypt. So if you secure the food and the grain, then you can actually
turn around
campaign.
and go stomp Babylon. And so he goes and captures Egypt, and he eventually goes to Memphis. He must have seen the pyramids, although maybe that was in Ptolemy's account. What Alexander walking around the pyramids and looking at them, maybe that was in Ptolemy's account. But eventually, Alexander wants to go to the northern port, because the book that exists in the back of the Greek mind, all Greeks, their sacred biblical text essentially is Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, the story of Troy, right? And so in that book, in the Odyssey, which maybe we'll even see a scene of this in this new movie, when Odysseus is essentially being like kicked around the Eastern Mediterranean, he lands on an island or a little port town on the northern coast of Egypt. And I think as the story goes, I forget exactly how it goes in the Odyssey, but he asks the people, where am I? And they say, you're on Pharos. And so maybe that means maybe that means this is Pharaoh's land. Maybe that means this is the Pharaoh's island, but it's called Pharos. So Alexander, being this huge fan of that great story, and just a kid, he's 23 or 25, and he's like, I'm gonna go find Pharos. So he goes to northern Egypt. Now the Egyptians, they don't like the water. There are not really that many Egyptian cities that are on this northern coast of the Mediterranean. They like to be pushed further back. This is another thing we think of the Egyptians as like riding these camels through the desert or whatever. The Egyptians did not want anything to do with hanging around in the Mediterranean or being in the desert. This isn't even ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt is just the river and like a mile on each side of the river where it's green and tropical. That's where the Egyptians lived. They didn't like the desert because that's where the roaming barbarians hung out. And, if you wandered out in the desert, you were going to get killed. So you needed to live literally on the Nile. On the Nile.
Yes,
that was your whole world.
And this is most civilizations.
This is, it's
very few
a lot of
civilizations choose to develop in like
you're going to be near your life source.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
And so, but
it is, the perception is kind of odd. There's like a...
They had rigid borders and a control agency.
But Alexander, he comes from a civilization of sea people. Because ancient Greece, we look at Greece as this little peninsula that sticks out right
Isles,
here.
right?
But yes, it's actually the coastlines and the isles.
Yeah.
So ancient Greece is not this, it's this.
Yeah.
It's all these little islands right here and like some of the coastal areas. And so that was the Greek world. And so Greeks really like water, and they like defensive positions with water.
Right.
So when he's in northern Egypt, he sees I think it's the Lake of Marios or something like that. But there's this little band that basically connects to the Mediterranean, and then it's fortified by a lake behind it. So it's this little band of land, and he looks at it and he's like, "This is where a city needs to be because you can
have a natural border."
Yeah,
to
yeah,
protect.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so he hops off of his horse and he's looking for like chalk or something, but he doesn't have any chalk to lay it to make a city layout. So he goes and grabs some grain out of a saddlebag, throws the grain in the dirt, and then Alexander himself, by his own hand, laid out the initial like core city plan. And he had an architect, I forget the architect's name, but he had an architect like jump down with him, and they lay it out so that the breeze will like sweep through the city. And he says, I want the roads to be 100 feet wide, or something equivalent to that. He wants this to be a grand city. So he lays it all out. And then as soon as he lays it all out, this flock of seabirds like swoop down and they devour all the grain in front of him. And he, ancient people are very superstitious. And so he thought that was a bad omen. He was like, maybe I shouldn't build this city here or whatever. And one of his guys like reassured him, no. This means that this city is going to feed many nations, or it's going to feed many people. So Alexander gets back on his horse, leaves his architect and a group of people behind. They start construction on the city.
Isn't history fun when you can make it up after?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what a story, right?
And yeah, exactly. So Alexander, he has to leave. He's got to go to a place in the western desert called Siwa, where he's going to be essentially like proclaimed the son of Amun-Ra, and he's going to be proclaimed pharaoh. He never goes back to Alexandria. He goes and conquers Babylon. Then he tries to push into India, and he eventually dies in Babylon at like 32 or 33.